beneath my rage. Will break, and all will burn beneath the shadow of my wings. Hatred burns through the cavernous deeps. Its wretched kingdoms quake beneath my rage. Will break, and all will burn beneath the shadow of my wings.
Hello everyone, welcome to Blizzard Entertainment. I'm Frank Pierce, one of Blizzard's co-founders. Today, we're going to be giving you a behind-the-scenes look at the making of World of Warcraft's newest and most exciting expansion yet, Cataclysm. The Warcraft universe has been evolving ever since the release of our first real-time strategy game, Warcraft Orcs and Humans, in 1994. The Cataclysm expansion takes the idea of change to a whole new level by completely transforming the world of Azeroth. Let's meet some of the teams responsible for this new chapter in Warcraft's history. Welcome to the World of Warcraft development team area. In these offices, designers work on everything from developing quests to fine-tuning battleground mechanics. So for Cataclysm, the team was faced with the challenge of redesigning Azeroth. To give you some more insight, members of the team are going to talk about the game's design, programming, art, story, and of course our main villain, Deathwing.
One of the challenges as World of Warcraft goes along is we keep wanting to add new stuff to it. I mean, it's a 5 or 6 year old game at this point, so there's a lot of new things to put in, but at the same time, the game just gets really, really big.
When we finished Wrath of the Lich King, we had a little bit of a moment of, wow, how will we ever top that? How will we do something better? Because we really had a lot of affinity for the Lich King. He obviously is a person who has a lot of story and a lot of history in the Warcraft universe. Bringing that story to a close felt really incredible and felt really epic. And we didn't really know originally how we were gonna top that.
One of the greatest evolutions, and I call it an evolution because that's really what it is, has been in quest design.
We want to have the players feel like they're taking a part in the actual course of the action rather than just going into a dungeon to kill these, kind of 3 guys for some loot. We'd rather have them feel like they're progressing the story forward.
I think we've become a lot better storytellers over the last couple of expansions. I think that we have figured out ways technologically to tell those stories.
What's the player's experience going to be coming through here? We try to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, kind of building to a climax on this zone's tale.
The driving force that we would like to know is that the players are trying to find out more about the story, and they want to push forward and know exactly why are they in this spot? What are they trying to do?
We've also learned through the process of doing Lich King about how to use our villains.
That's a huge difference between playing through Wrath of the Lich King and playing through Burning Crusade, where, yeah, Illidan was in a lot of the art and stuff like that, but a lot of players never saw him and they didn't really bump into him all the time. Whereas once you're going through Northrend, gosh, the Lich King is everywhere. He's popping up in dungeons and quests, and you hear about him all the time. Definitely want to do the same thing with Deathwing and Cataclysm, where his presence is felt and he's around.
Part of setting an environment like this is making sure the fiction is sold correctly. And to do that, the world has to be cohesive.
I think a lot of the lessons we've learned are coming into play just by the concept that we're redoing the old world.
Probably an order of 30 to 40 of the old world zones that are at least moderate to heavily redone.
Looking back at the old world and counting all the zones and trying to figure out how long it's going to take and how much time we have to spend on each zone. It's kind of like, oh my God, there's so much here to work on.
When we set up initially, we set up a kind of a master list of zones.
And then we made 2 columns. One is questing, and then one was level design.
We went through those zones and classified them into 3 categories, essentially, high, medium, and low.
For basically how much each zone sucked for both of those categories.
We took that list and we just started essentially doing a triage of sorts. We really just kind of sat down and went through the zones hand by hand and just said, okay, what's important for us for this expansion?
Some zones, actually we thought we were okay level design wise, but just needed some quest help. Some zones needed a lot more level design help than they did quest, but in a lot of cases, zones that were really in bad shape or in bad shape for multiple reasons, and so in both ways.
Examples would be Thousand Needles,
Westfall,
Lordaeron,
Sunken Temple,
Western Playlands,
Stone Talon,
Dead Mines,
Silver Pines,
Stormwind,
Glock Modan,
Blackrock Depths.
There's a ton of stuff, basically.
A good example would be something like the Barrens, a huge zone. For most players, really hard to get around. You didn't have mount speed and things like that. So we went back, cut it into 2 zones.
One of them being a horde-only zone, which is Northern Barrens, and that would be a 10 to 20 horde zone, and then the southern part of the Barrens, which became a 30 to 35 everybody zone.
And then split it up, requested everything with better hubs and better flows. So I think what people will find is that when you're playing through something like that, it'll feel more similar to what a Northrend zone from a quest flow perspective felt like. You'll see new vehicle quests, just a lot of new tech and a lot of things to just make the flow a lot cleaner overall.
Getting in under the hood and fixing all those has been a huge challenge.
A lot of players might not realize how much smoke and mirrors there was behind, the curtains.
It's the designers, that's what they do. They figure out ways to make awesome. And we have to kind of go, okay, that's awesome. Now let's actually make it work.
I'd like to say that what we did is we just, did some little like this, and then people could fly over terrain. But that's really not how it was.
So one of the big new introductions with Cataclysm is the ability to use your flying mount in the old world. Obviously, this is something that has taken a lot of work for us. It's a bigger challenge than what most players might imagine.
The reason we didn't do it, we hadn't done it sooner, is because of what that would entail, which was essentially redoing the whole world. When we thought, well, we've got this expansion called Cataclysm coming out, and we happen to be redoing the whole world, so guess what? What better time, right?
The original game was not designed with flying mounts in mind, with any kind of ability to see above the ground level.
A large majority of it for the players just doesn't exist. If you couldn't get there, we just didn't build it.
Mountain ranges that had no backsides or coastlines that hadn't been detailed.
We as game developers, we like to cheat a lot. And by cheat, we mean save ourselves time. And if you don't ever see it, then there's no reason to finish it. There's no reason to really make it look good. And so you can get away with a lot of trickery.
Stormwind was one giant smoke and mirror, pretty much.
It's all facades, and if you flew over Stormwind, it would just be a lot of really, really bad things.
Cathedral in Stormwind was originally built in a way where it was just kind of floating above Stormwind, and you only saw the real cathedral as you came into the district where the cathedral actually existed.
Stormwind was effectively almost a rework from the ground up in terms of making it actually work in a 3D environment space like that.
And that was a monumental task, and they did an amazing job. Flying over, it's stunning. And the same for Orgrimmar. Aside from all the new stuff they did to it, again, same issues, and it looks amazing.
In the process, we were actually also able to add some more to it.
While we're making it flyable, let's go ahead and add in the things that we had always wanted to have. So something like Stormwind Keep was never really a building players could see, or really it was just kind of a texture on the side of a hill. So we took the opportunity to go back and completely build the keep out in 3D, redesign the interior so it makes a little bit more sense for the players, give it a huge courtyard out front with a huge statue of Varian Wrynn, really reinforced our new leaders that we have now. So not only are we trying to make the cities feel better and more usable for players, but we're also trying to reinforce the storylines of what's been happening.
The storyline is very much centered around Deathwing's reemergence into Azeroth.
So with the Cataclysm comes destruction.
You can see the impact that Deathwing is having on the old world. You can see it in places like Stormwind, where he's crashed into the towers at the front of Stormwind gates. You can see it in places like Loch Modan, where he's kind of crushed his way through the dam at Loch Modan, causing a huge flood into the wetlands.
We knew we wanted to show some destruction from Deathwing and Stormwind, but we didn't know exactly how we were going to do it. We were thinking about maybe making it look like he had burned some tops of the buildings, maybe he had knocked over some statues. And those things we did, and we just didn't feel like it had the impact that we wanted. So what we ended up doing is making a hard call, and we just destroyed the entire park district. It's just completely gone at this point. All our druid trainers are there, our moonwell is there. We had a number of things there that we ended up having to relocate to other parts of the city. At the same time, it added a huge story element to the city. When we were originally designing the zones for Cataclysm, we knew we had to come up with 5 new zones, and each had to feel unique. And one of the big pitches that we had was for a zone called Vashir, which was going to be our first ever underwater zone.
Challenges of doing an underwater zone, aside from everything not working, it's hard to target, it's hard to fight. Even if you're moving at run speed, for example, it's going to feel slower because you don't have anything to ground you.
3D combat is really hard, and we're not like a flight sim. So it's like, if you're playing a flight simulator game, you have all this heads-up display with all the little whoopie-doo arrows and circles on the edge of the screen and all that stuff that tell you your target's over there, your locked target's over there, incoming missile from the right. Well, this is a fantasy game. That doesn't make any sense.
Nobody likes swimming. I don't think I've played a game that swimming is enjoyable in.
Many of us have played games underwater, and the experience has been, in the past, less than satisfactory, and of course we don't want that for WoW. We want awesome. That's what Blizzard does.
We do want to convey the vastness of the ocean, of the sea, and we want to make sure that people feel like they're underwater. But we don't want the issues that come with being underwater.
So how do we make a 3D environment like underwater swimming feel good? The answer, put you on the floor.
We came up with a concept of sea legs, essentially. Through a series of quests, you earn your sea legs, and we allow you to walk on the ground. And then what we do is occasionally not every quest, but occasionally send you up to swim. What's cool about the sea legs effect is that while you're walking underwater, if you press the spacebar to jump, essentially, you go into a swim. So it does feel like a free-form swim, but it feels magical too. We actually got our animation team on board with doing a special series of animations for all the races to really make it feel like you're running and walking underwater, and that turned out awesome.
We also created an entire new art kit. We did a ton of research and we came up with just a huge number of corals, of new creatures. We have a whale shark creature down there that I think is the size of possibly a whole dungeon. It's huge. You'll see it swimming around in the zone. I think it's kind of a good example of how we sometimes take things way too far past where they need to be, but what we end up with is something that's really amazing in the end.
So PvP has undergone a huge evolution from when we originally launched the game till today.
Early on, I think the designers hoped that world PvP would just erupt. You would see the enemy and you would go kill them, and that would just be, you would kind of find the fun there.
The way I would put PvP as World of Warcraft launched was quest ganking, right?
Cataclysm, kind of the next step, is to go back to the battlegrounds, which we thought did a really good job of capturing that orcs versus humans feel.
The inspiration for the new battlegrounds is oriented around giving players new environments, but with familiar gameplay.
One of the battlegrounds is called the Battle for Gilneas. Art-wise, we went with a Gilneas art kit. The gameplay style is 3-point AB style map. The other one is Twin Peaks, and Twin Peaks is a capture the flag style battleground. So rule set wise, it'll feel very similar to Warsong Gulch. When they get there, it'll feel familiar. They'll know the storylines because they've played through the quests there, so it won't feel like something foreign.
So you can get together with your friends, make a team that goes into battlegrounds and get any type of PvP rewards available in the game.
We're trying to make sure that we maintain a better balance of that original vision of battleground mayhem versus the skilled arena battles, the tight, intense, small, teamwork-oriented kind of stuff, and trying to make sure that we get the best of both worlds.
Hopefully this is going to be like what PvP was always meant to feel like. I'm sure by the time players are playing this, they'll know whether or not we were successful with that.
Cataclysm certainly represents the largest change to World of Warcraft since it launched, and we're really excited to be able to go back and revisit some of our best places and worst places and really take them to a new level that we think players are going to be really excited about.
We really have a better feel for what makes for effective quest mechanics, better ways to tell stories, and then of course we have a lot more in our toolkit now than we used to.
We're always trying to figure out ways to make this a WoW game that we all love and just take it to the next level.
The guys have been working really hard on it, and it feels so different, so new.
We liken developing WoW to kind of the runaway train. It's always going, you can't ever stop and catch your breath. It's just more content, more stuff.
Sometimes it's nice to just kind of stop and smell the roses, as they say. It's all in the details, and I think there's a lot of that the players can enjoy.
In addition to game designers and programmers, the team has some of the most talented artists in the industry. These folks create new heroes, monsters, environments, and gear. They bring style and character to the worlds that we play in. How do they do that? Let's go find out.
So it seems to me like the point of doing a behind-the-scenes look at what happens on the art or in the making of a game like WoW, you don't want to just hear about the typical stuff that you could read about online. And this seems like a good opportunity to see what it actually is like creating the game as opposed to what we may project all the time. I'd like to use this opportunity to kind of give you that look and talk a little bit about some of the mishaps and some of the cool parts of making the game and ultimately how we came up with what we wanted to do for Cataclysm.
Probably the biggest thing we've learned are things that the general players probably won't even notice. It's basically how we structure our team and how we can make a zone just more efficiently and more quickly.
We have developed a very sophisticated art style. I would say that the original World of Warcraft was kind of the foundation for us to build upon with the next two ensuing expansions. We really want to try and emphasize the storyline throughout the whole game. I think it helps the player feel connected and feel like they know what's going on, with this expansion.
One thing that was really important to us was to maintain a sense of familiarity in the zones that we were reworking, so that people didn't travel into Ashara and see all the new goblin stuff, but also go, what the hell happened to the zone? It doesn't look like anything I remember it being. I think we would have failed if we got to the point where people were disappointed in how much we changed things. A certain amount of that is probably inevitable, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're keeping things exciting and new, and this was an awesome opportunity to do that. So we centralized the whole process around the Cataclysm. But then you also have some pretty cool things like the Goblin and Worgen that give you an excuse to bring new architecture styles in, new storylines, and sort of help to fold those people into the Horde and the Alliance in ways that endear them to players. That might be one of the hardest things, as a side note, about a new race is, yeah, we know Worgen, we know Goblins, but what makes them familiar to us? And as players, when you see a Worgen walking through Stormwind, or you see a Goblin walking through Orgrimmar or anywhere, what's going to make you feel like, yeah, those guys are really part of my group. They're part of the Horde, they're part of the Alliance. Using that was a cool method of saying, okay, well, let's not just show new Goblin architecture in Kazan or in the new starting areas. Let's actually talk about how we can do the things that we build for those areas and pull it into the old world so that it's still Ashara, but now it's Ashara with Goblin influence.
The designers thought, yeah, if we're going to make this, it's a significant investment. So let's weave some story in here. Like with lots of our starting zones, you start as a player in a village in the countryside somewhere, and then move to a main city. But we thought, well, no, let's throw the player in at the deep end. Let's chuck them into the city. Actually, let's make the city in a war zone, really, between the infected Worgen and the citizens that still remain human. And let's weave our saga, the first 4 or 5 levels, around this. Make it really exciting for the players.
Used to be years ago when you make video games, a video game artist would make everything to do with the game. Not so on a game like World of Warcraft.
There's a great relationship between concept art and design. It's a really, really smooth thing. I think both departments feed off each other. When design first tackle a zone, they do Illustrator maps, which are just, you get sheets of paper that have just got geometric shapes flattened, dotted about on them, just to show you location, scale, key points of interest and events. And I made the suggestion, well, these are fine for fundamental design documents, but would it be useful for you guys to have something a bit more arty to work from? Because the designers then take those Illustrator maps and start building the world out in 3D and kind of doing a sort of a fake isometric world. So I draw the little mountains in. It looks like really, really old maps from sort of 400 or 500 years ago. So you get little scribbly drawings for buildings, and here's a couple of spiky trees to suggest a forest, and you get a feel for the topography, for the geography, how the zone fills out. So I did a few of those initially for Gilneas, and gave them back to the designers. They went, "These are fantastic! Why haven't we been doing these all along?"
Our main goal as the dungeon team is to be the support for the design. Take what they give us and interpret it into an art asset, which is challenging, but it can be a lot of fun as well. And there's a lot of going back and forth between the design and art.
In terms of looking at the whole art and design of the project, there were a few bits and pieces, few races, few baddies that we did that I really, really liked. I think probably Twilight's Hammer ended up being, for me, the most significant. They are the minions of Deathwing.
Being that he's the major villain for this expansion, obviously we wanted to make sure that we tied him into a lot of the things that we were doing and made sure that it was always building towards when you would eventually, or if you would eventually meet up with him. Most visual impact on what we were doing artistically would be, the Cataclysm and what happened when he came into the world. When we approached re-envisioning the old world, it wasn't so much of a how do we re-envision it as much as it was how do we take what's there and make sure that we stay true to what people have come to love, know and love, but also have probably gotten a little sick of looking at as they grind new characters up 0 to 60. If we didn't have the tool of the Cataclysm to work with, I think it would have been a very difficult thing to do. The Cataclysm helped out a lot, just in the sense of, well, what are we going to do to change the Barrens? Let's put a big crack in the middle of it and change it into northern and southern, and that gives you like a central theme. We can keep what's there, but it gives you this whole new area to explore and a new central sort of like exciting element to the zone.
The old world simply was not designed to be flyable and to go to places you normally wouldn't go if you were just on the ground.
So we had to go in and figure out how the roofs are going to match together. And ironically, I found out later that when they were building the original game, it did have roofs, and then they deleted them.
Most of the game was meant to be seen from a certain point of view. In Vashj'ir in particular, it was very important for the exterior level designers to be kind of a surprise for players, to be something they had never seen before. So we wanted them to have a great first-time experience. So as you come out of the first little cave, and we wanted that to be very striking and very stunning the first time the players saw this zone, they knew it was going to be something special, something different, definitely something they've never seen before in World of Warcraft.
As far as dungeons go, the first one that we started working on was for Vashj'ir. It's Abyssal Maw. It truly reached beyond my expectations as far as the colors and the design. Our programmers really stepped up to the plate and gave us a lot of new shaders and things like that has enhanced our textures and enhanced the quality of our dungeons. As you go through it, we wanted it to feel very immersive, no pun intended. It is an underwater dungeon, but we really wanted you to feel like you're underwater, and there's plant life and there's movement going on, and it's not just kind of stagnant. We wanted that feeling of even just the water and that subtle movement coming across there. We are also getting some caustics so that we get that underwater reflection.
So we've seen elementals for a long time in the game, and they are very cool, but I know that I personally am sick of seeing the same elementals. I know there are a lot of people that feel the same way. So when we're talking about an expansion where the elemental planes are broken and elementals are pouring forth into Azeroth, clearly we're going to talk about what can we do with the elementals to sort of bring them up to a new bar, or at least give people new content to look at, new creatures to play around with. We went through a series of concepting, gave it to one person to concept, and then we took it back away and had 5 people concept it. And throughout that process, we started working with the Twilight's Hammer kit, started talking about how they build their buildings, summon Elementium, how everything around them is keyed into that Elementium vibe, and it kind of clicked. We use that with the elementals. Like, these guys are subjugating the elementals, they're part of their army. How would the Twilight's Hammer guys put an elemental under their control? The solution that Mark Gibbons came up with, which was really cool, was what if they caged them, made a literal cage that was somewhat like a rib cage or an actual physical structure that would summon around these elementals and control them. All the elementals have a similar theme. They all have the same cage that's holding them. And then obviously there are rock and fire and water guys, but the really neat thing was, how do we use that cage and come up with interesting silhouettes, use what we already have with the existing elementals and kind of make it familiar but new. And I think we came up with a pretty cool solution for that.
People ask an awful lot about where you get your ideas from, where does inspiration come from? And for a long time I struggled to answer that, because what I've realized now is it's not a conscious process. It's the subconscious brain that percolates ideas. And when you sit down with a piece of paper, if you're ready to draw stuff, it's because your subconscious has told your conscious what to do. So the worst thing for me is to sit down with a blank piece of paper and have no idea what I'm going to draw. The subconscious, it's like a muscle you have to exercise, and you have to feed it.
It's interesting being somebody who's not necessarily involved with the day-to-day creation process on a game like this. I mean, I am, but I'm not the person there that's building the models in every case, although I do go in and mess things up from time to time and people have to clean up after me. But what's really cool for me is to see a team of talented artists like we have, and really they're the most talented artists that I've ever worked with in my entire life, and see what they're able to not only do on their own on an individual basis, but also what they're capable of when they come together as a team, and see the character guys working on the Tol'vir, and then see the dungeon guys working on the Uldum dungeon, and environment guys working on Uldum, and You would think that I would be the one that's sort of bringing them all together and making sure they're communicating. It's actually just this really crazy process of, hey, look at what I made, and that keys this other person. I go, wow, that's so cool. We could totally base a building off of that, or that design on that character is really awesome. We're going to use that as a centerpiece for our dungeon. There is no human being who could ever set out and have the picture of what we create in their heads. It takes those people bringing their ideas together to come up with that ultimate project. And for me, that's inspiring.
Welcome to the Blizzard Film Department. This is the team responsible for all the incredible cinematics that we see in every Blizzard game. Non-interactive cinematic sequences have been an important part of every game since Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans. With Cataclysm, the team has created some of the most amazing cinematics yet.
The opening cinematic for Cataclysm is basically a disaster movie.
When we saw the effects cinematic and storyboard form, my CG supervisor and myself, we both laughed a lot and just sort of looked at it and said, yeah, that's funny. Where's the real cinematic? You know, good joke. But seriously.
Every shot had some sort of destruction or some sort of force or some sort of earthquake or wave or something going on.
Having all these sets that we got to pull apart, I thought, well, that's just going to be easy. And I was wrong.
We were concerned about not necessarily getting it done, but just sort of how it would all come together. Once we realized that that was actually the cinematic and got over gasping and so forth, looking at it and trying to figure out what was going to be the most challenging, was realizing that the biggest thing was going to be just the sheer number of effects that we had to do for the show.
But I think we were all pretty fairly confident that we would find a way to accommodate that and keep the scope of it manageable.
It turned out to be a fun project just to have modeling build all these crazy sets and then set it up so animators could tear it to the ground.
From a visual storytelling perspective, we wanted to show the darkening of the world. We wanted it to feel really ominous. So when we first see Azeroth up top, you know, the sun is out, it's glorious, we showcase the beauty of the world. And then progressively, as we go through the scene, the sun gets lower in the sky, the world gets dimmer, so that by the time that Deathwing shows up on the gates of Stormwind, the sky's gone dark, the fire has spread in around the gates and is giving us sort of an echo of that hellish environment that we started with.
Try to give the audience a sense of progression of all the events that happened in the show, and hopefully to sell the scale and epicness of the whole thing that's going on, and also set up the momentum for, you know, the future events that will happen in the game.
Initially, we also wanted to introduce our new playable races, the Goblins and the Worgen. We were very excited about bringing those characters to life. We had storyboarded scenes of the Goblins evacuating their erupting island, and the Worgen were going to spill out of Gilneas as the Greymane Wall falls down. It was going to be really cool, but then reality intruded because we realized that the sheer scope of the disaster effects was so labor intensive that we were going to have to make some hard choices about what we wanted to include. So we ended up refocusing on the core story, which was Deathwing devastates Azeroth. And when we did that, it became pretty clear that as cool as those character reveals would be, that was the sort of thing that could be handled very well in gameplay, and that it was probably better for us to leave those introductions to the game itself. One of our bigger jobs was just deciding what lands we were going to break.
The wonderful thing about working on something like World of Warcraft is you have a very established set of environments.
The game team was very helpful in that regard. They gave us a lot to choose from, and then we worked with them to kind of whittle that list down.
So many different environments, and then having those environments be interactive enough to be destroyed.
Every environment piece that we saw in the foreground and a bunch in the background had to be destroyed. So it was a kind of an environment-driven production rather than a character-driven production.
It's a lot different than animating characters, but it doesn't mean that you can't put a lot of character into it.
Our big priorities were that we find places that were very iconic and recognizable to the players. And also, you know, we wanted both Alliance and Horde territories to be represented.
You look at Stormwind and Darkshore and Loch Modan. For a player, it's a lot like being able to say, oh, look, it's the Eiffel Tower, or look, it's, the Pyramid of Giza, or, oh, look, it's the Statue of Liberty. It is really that iconic for them.
We went through a lot of iteration to capture the essence of those places, but also ground them in this sort of heightened reality. It's a really intense prospect trying to make all that work. Our effects team had to jump onto that just as soon as they possibly could, just to be able to finish on time.
And they had way more work than we did.
Like everybody else.
Realizing that the effects were going from more of a atmospheric or look and feel type thing, going to more of a centralized character was going to be a very big challenge for our group.
We had mountains of water and skies full of fire.
A lot of smokes, sparks, lava effects, dripping lavas, glowing mouth, anything you can think of.
We tried a variety of different approaches with the fire for Deathwing. His size and scope of the areas that he's traveling over is enormous.
Deathwing is a really big dragon. He's like airliner big, right?
He might be traveling as much, I think in the Darkshore shot, as much as a mile away from camera and swooping over that in less than a minute.
That presents its own unique challenges in terms of portraying that kind of scale.
I was very afraid on a more macro level that we would build a fire or build smoke or embers or what have you, and that we would not be able to convey how big he really is. We definitely went for a more particle sprite-based solution initially because that seemed to be the right sort of choice given the distance that we're working, but it wasn't really giving us the look that we wanted or the feel of Deathwing's sort of fire curtain and that magical sort of fire that follows him wherever he goes. So we ended up actually going to a fluid sim. It was one of the largest fluid sims we've ever attempted. And we actually had to up the memory on many of our boxes to make sure that we'd actually be able to meet the requirements and the detail level that we really wanted to make.
Another challenging shot was Deathwing emerging from the lava. We were seeing many, many different parts of the body throughout the entire shot, and we have to sell the weight the whole time along the way.
We used to call that shot the palm olive shot because he has his fingers in a bowl of lava. His nails are being done as he pulls his hand out of that lava and smashes it down on the rock. Overall, Deathwing's texturing and his look has just been a benefit for us. It was really made our jobs a lot easier.
One of the real pleasures of doing Cataclysm was getting to design Deathwing himself.
We knew that we were going to see him from all angles, so he needed to be believable from all angles. So we give him the full treatment.
I saw the concepts and the 2D animatics, so I got a good sense of what the dragon was about, and I thought it was really cool. He has this inner evil energy inside of him that's bursting out.
He is so full of molten fury that he needs a metal exoskeleton essentially to hold himself together. And so in addition to the neck and spine plates, which were more established in lore, we needed to make metal staples basically.
I kind of saw it as metal stitches, kind of holding them together, and there's lava trying to seep out of it. My first impression, I thought he looked really cool, and I was pretty excited to realize him, or we to realize him from 2D to 3D.
When it came to rigging Deathwing, we used the same character TD that we used for Sindragosa from Wrath of the Lich King. And what that did for us was it allowed us to get a character up and running very quickly based on the previous techniques that we had used.
We need to do a series of poses thinking about all the different locomotion that he might be doing, such as flying or climbing or walking. We put him on all these different poses and we consider the anatomy and the limb lengths.
He sure deforms correctly, especially around the neck area. He had really extreme poses of straight and also the S-curve. So we wanted to make sure that when it deformed, it would look good in both angles.
In the end, it's really the best way that we need to tell the story. How is Deathwing going to look and move in order to tell a story?
Deathwing is a very complicated character, let me say that. Deathwing is a very complicated character both to model and to animate, and I was tremendously impressed at how our team was able to bring him to life.
Cataclysm's antagonist is Deathwing, the dragon aspect responsible for the cataclysmic events in this expansion. To tell you more about Deathwing, here are some of the designers and storytellers that know him best.
Deathwing is one of the 5 dragon aspects of the Warcraft universe. The idea is that dragons in Warcraft are split up into 5 distinct flights, and they were empowered long ago to guard certain aspects of the world. The blue dragons guard magic, black dragons guard the earth, red dragons are, protectors of life, and so on. So Deathwing and the black dragon flight originally were meant to protect the earth. Originally, Deathwing was named Neltharion. It was very jovial and did a good job protecting the world. As in deeper Warcraft lore, there are very dark, villainous creatures called the Old Gods that were long ago chained beneath the world. And I think their kind of crazy, maddening whispers over the millennia kind of seeped up from their subterranean prisons and drove Neltharion a little crazy, to the point where long ago he lost his mind, ceased to be Neltharion, and really became Deathwing. A specific conflict about 10,000 years in the past of present-day Warcraft, called the War of the Ancients, where the big demon army was invading the world. And it was at that time where the 5 dragon flights united were meant to drive this enemy from the shores of the world and save the world, fulfill their function of protecting the mortal races. And in the midst of all that, as Deathwing's madness was kind of growing in his ears, he created an artifact called the Dragon Soul, right? That he tricked his brethren into believing, well, if we combine our power as we're meant to, this will be the great weapon, to save the world. And in truth, once he had all their powers put into this terrible artifact, he claimed it for his own and essentially betrayed them in the worst moment at the 11th hour, essentially turned on the other dragon flights, decimated the blue flight, forever cursed the black flight, and just pretty much broke the family apart. And as his madness overcame him, his innate kind of powers over the forces of earth and fire just kind of erupted in his body. His gargantuan body literally split apart with like fire and magma in this horrific eruption, almost as if he's like a volcano in dragon form. And that day he became Deathwing, just this raging, fiery engine of destruction. And one of the interesting things about Deathwing's visual kit is that while he's this gargantuan dragon, and the fact that he's kind of literally always falling apart because his rage just cannot be contained by his physical shell, they actually had to hammer into these adamantine plates all along his spine just to literally staple his body together. His rage was so uncontrollable. So it creates a very cool visual look for him as a villain in the series. In the latest incarnation of Deathwing, which is probably the most dangerous ever, he's actually stapled together with Elementium, which is kind of a new steel we've conjured for the game that kind of channels the powers of the elements through it. It's kind of a conduit for whatever elemental power is aimed at it. So certainly his is fire and stone, so he's kind of more dangerous than ever before. So why now, right? Why is Deathwing emerging, erupting into the world and causing this cataclysmic event? The answer to that is that at this time in the history of Azeroth, a long chain of events is finally reaching its fulfillment. There is this very ancient prophecy that is not often, spoken of, that speaks of kind of this hour of twilight, the final days of the world. If the old gods that were chained long ago had their way, set in motion, this chain of events that would enact, their final vision to remake the world in their image, this hour of twilight. And what we've seen happening to some great degree over the past number of Warcraft products, probably starting with the Gates of Ankh-Kirash patch, where we saw the old god Cthulhu, kind of rising beneath the land of Silithus. So clearly there's a chain of events in motion where the old gods are rising, their ancient machinations are finally paying off, and Deathwing ultimately is their greatest hammer. He is the great weapon that they've been waiting to use all these years. While he's had his own machinations, over the course of history, trying to make his own dragonflights and kind of build his own kingdoms, the truth is, he was corrupted by the old gods from the start. And in this final hour, right, where they will, attempt to assure their, ascendancy, he is pretty much the greatest weapon, for them to unleash. So that's why now their final end game is in play, and he is pretty much the great key to it all.
Warcraft's cast of characters keeps growing, and the epic storyline continues to evolve with each new expansion. To shed some light on the writing process, let's talk to some of the team's storytellers.
How much more can these people and these factions take? You know, the Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm. I'm so excited about this latest chapter because it just brings in so much of the mythology of the world and the richness of its characters. And, you know, apart from just clever story hooks, it begins to truly show how much soul is possible, you know, how much emotional connectivity you can have to these events and these characters. For the genre and for just the World of Warcraft in particular, I think there's a little bit something for everybody, whether you're re-leveling again 1 through 60, which is surprisingly emotional, given these lands that you've known and ventured through all this time, to see them reborn in new ways. But with all of these things combined, it just feels just very rich and very satisfying, in terms of the fiction finally coming full circle and all the mythology of the world. Completing this circuit.
World of Warcraft's a 5-year-old game. It's got a huge history. And I was part of that history. I was a player. So to come in on Cataclysm, where we're going to redo some of the old world, that's really cool for me as a player. I get all geeked up about it because I get to come in and I remember the quests I didn't like, and I remember the things that bothered me as a player. I get to fix them. I can actually go back to the old world and really fix this stuff up.
It's all about upheaval. And it's not just the physical upheaval, but the political upheaval that's occurred.
So Thrall, right? He's very central to events in Cataclysm. And in a lot of ways, he's kind of maybe like the most popular Warcraft character singularly. He's this interesting mix of kind of old school orc and but raised by humans, and kind of found a new way to lead the Horde, lead his people. He's very principled. He's very Superman-like, right? I think most people, when they consider Thrall, well, he's incorruptible. He always does the right thing. He's mega powerful. And one of the really interesting themes of Cataclysm that we've been exploring is just the idea that things fall apart, right? At a global level, at an environmental level, at a societal level, at a spiritual level. And really looking at Thrall, that this pillar of all things Warcraft, right? The one incorruptible dude out there. What if Thrall's sense of identity was in jeopardy as well? That's a pretty radical, thing for that character. And it just felt immediately true. Like, yeah, we started looking at Thrall. He brought his people out of slavery. Was raised as a gladiator, but really became this very wise, shamanic, messianic character, right? United two worlds and, created a new homeland for his people. And the idea that all of his experience that looks so noble and is so, super heroic, what if at base he was just this lonely kid whose parents were murdered? There's a little more Bruce Wayne going on there than anyone would suspect. And all of this duty and obligation and all of the things he has done for his people to distinguish himself. What if it's actually more of like a warped codependency? Actually doesn't know who he is outside of this duty, outside of this mission that he has to always be the answer, always solve the problem. And he's done very well, but what if inside he's actually pretty hollow?
As the initial ripples start to hit the world and we can start feeling Deathwing writhing beneath us, in the plane of Deep Home and plane of Earth, Thrall senses this and senses something is wrong, something is happening on the tail end of this Northrend expansion. This initiates the changing of the guard. As Garrosh is coming off the victory and we're starting to feel more tremors and bad things happen, Thrall puts him in charge in the interim, an interim war chief of sorts. Garrosh is the son of Grom Hellscream, a legendary orc, probably the most important orc, or one of the most important orcs to exist. An interesting and often overlooked facet of Garrosh's character is he's a brown orc. Players actually tend to take this for granted. They just look at it like, yeah, he's a brown orc. What does that even mean? Well, it actually has a great meaning to orcs. Brown is the original color of orcs. Orcs were brown from birth on Draenor. What corrupted them was the blood curse. When Garrosh's father Grom drank from Manoroth's blood, and essentially the rest of the orcs did. they underwent a physical transformation, this curse that changed their skin from brown to green and affected their eyes and other things as well. So when an orc that has come through the dark portal and has endured the blood curse and other things, terrible things, sees another brown orc, they have a very, very visceral reaction, in a good way, I think. I think that you see that, you almost see yourself back when things were good, when things were pure, when there wasn't insanity happening to your homeworld and it being torn apart. And that's something that hits them instantly. So they see this brown orc that represents pretty much the ultimate. So this is what Thrall had to contend with in terms of who he puts to power.
The earth is starting to buckle, the cataclysm is beginning. Thrall decides to head back to, the old country in Outland, to go to Nagron, Throne of the Elements, and talk to elementals who have lived through the destruction of their world. Hey guys, are there things I can look for, to tell me if my world's gonna blow up? And while he goes back to Nagron, he meets a character named Agra, who is a shaman lieutenant of Thrall's grandma, Gaia. Thrall and Agra will kind of become an item. And Agra, as a very accomplished shaman herself, will kind of challenge Thrall. You wear the name of slave. Like, who do you think you are? People think you're this rock star war chief, but like when I look at you, I feel the depth of the insecurity, the depth of the hollowness, the rhythms and systemic thinking that Thrall's become all about. And she challenges him at that most innate level. They're like, did you really know who you are? Do you really believe, that the self, image you have is the truest you? And throughout the events of Cataclysm, ultimately Agra and Thrall will come back to Azeroth, and he will rally the Earthen Ring, and he will leave the Horde to literally go out and try and knit the world back together. But over the course of his adventures, he will see who he truly is, and his own spiritual realization of the truth of him, of the power of his life, of his connectivity with all these characters and people that he loves and the people that he loves. His own healing will ultimately empower him to play a big part in saving the world and healing the world, literally.
No gaming experience would be complete without the efforts of the sound department. Whether it's bringing Azeroth to life through sound effects or enhancing the mood of a dungeon with music, this is the team responsible for Cataclysm's unforgettable audio.
The sound department at Blizzard Entertainment is responsible for everything you hear, not only in all our games, but in the cinematics and the movies, the web, the marketing materials. Our main tools of our trade are music and dialogue and sound effects. These are applied across 3 very well-known game franchises that are all very different. It's really been a pleasure to work on this latest expansion of World of Warcraft, which is the Cataclysm. Sound is an amazing tool for not only enhancing the gameplay, but also telling story. There are different types of ways we can communicate with sound. Some of it's very direct, like when the NPCs speak to you.
This is the beginning and the end, mortals.
Some of it's nonverbal. The sound effects themselves or what they might tell you about what is happening or might happen to your character in the game. Then there's the atmosphere, increasing the depth and the breadth of this world and suspending your disbelief. One of our most important tools is silence. It's really important to know when not to use sound, just as it is to know when to use sound. The music in World of Warcraft doesn't play all the time. It, in fact, materializes out of the ambient sound effects background, and it plays and it reinforces where you are. And after the music plays, it doesn't just usually end with a bang, it recedes back into the ambience, so that the line between the music and the ambience is a little gray. Sound designers often say that if you've noticed the sound, that we've probably failed on some level. Unless, of course, it's something really big and epic. Musically, this expansion is so big that in order to meet our goals, we brought in a couple of more composers to help us with all of this. So in addition to myself and Derek Duke, who has worked on World of Warcraft from the beginning, we brought in Neil Acree, who has composed the music for the past 2 cinematics, and we brought in David Arkenstone, who is most famous for having written some of the tavern music and also the Argent Tournament music. What I'd like to do is invite them all to join us and talk a little bit more about what inspires us, how we work, and I'm sure each person's answer will be different and interesting. So let's join the rest of the composers. How do you approach music for World of Warcraft? How do you even begin to write this stuff?
Just looking at images and playing through the game, I'm looking for what emotion somebody might be getting.
It seems like there are a lot of themes that people really love and maybe we shouldn't be messing with.
Yeah, well, I don't think you'll hear anything messed with too much, and if it has, you might hear a newer version, just a refresh of that same theme. The technology we were using back then, we didn't use a whole lot of real instruments. It's kind of been a chance in this expansion to see some of that come to life in some different, more robust arrangements.
Some of the themes, especially the big city themes, have gotten a bit of a refresh, not in changing the melodies, but in using more live instruments.
I put a group together to do music for all the taverns. We got to record that live with acoustic instruments, and it was pretty exciting. Trying to get knowledgeable about all the races and what kind of music they might have and what might be in their tavern. You know, it was pretty real.
I think the music is almost one of the characters in this game.
That's one of the ways that I think that the music in WoW kind of reaches beyond its original meaning in the context of the land or the zone or the story. And you remember, like, this is the music that I was hearing when I was supposed to be cramming for my exams or when my wife was pregnant or whatever, because that music permeates you so much while you're playing, it takes on a meaning outside of the game. I try to crystallize as much in my head before I get to the computer and the keyboard, because my tendency is if I attack the keyboard, it will lead me in a direction that I didn't have in my head and like, oh, that sounds good and that sounds interesting, but it's a little farther away than what I had in mind. So I try to come at it with that and then spend the time, you know, editing in the computer and preparing things for the orchestra or whatever else.
Lyrically, I was going to mention that all of us have been using lyrics from within the languages of the game. The creative development team at Blizzard wrote some lyrics for me that were translated into the languages that were appropriate. That gives a whole extra layer of depth.
I also think one of the strengths is that, well, there's certain tendencies to it all sounding like Warcraft. At the same time, there are so many cultures and so many different races, kinds of people, different influences, that the fact that we don't have one composer writing all the music for the World of Warcraft, there's something in everybody's personality that seeps out, even if you're taking somebody else's melody and repurposing it. That lends a depth to the culture of Warcraft music.
When you get to really get into a zone and really make that zone come alive through music, it's a unusual opportunity, I think, in this world.
Well, very well said, and I guess we're in concert here of saying, see you all, see you all in Azeroth.
World of Warcraft programming is the backbone of the game. Without that, the game itself wouldn't even function. To give you guys an idea of how we make it all happen, we're going to talk to some of the team's software engineers.
What I do here at Blizzard, I spend about half my time trying to keep the servers up and running smoothly. There's always crazy issues that pop up that need to be figured out.
How do you suddenly having played the game and thought a lot about how the combat systems work, and as a player, you know, all these things like, oh, my heal works this way and my melee spells work that way and all this stuff, and suddenly, well, now they really work this way and they really work that way, because I'm actually looking at the code and going, oh, that's what they do. That's how the data's built. You know, obviously, as an engineer, I thought, well, if I wanted to build WoW, how would I do it? And of course, I was completely wrong.
We were trying to finish a dungeon in a couple of raid nights. Like, we only had 2 nights a week to raid with the raid group that I raid with, and that wasn't really enough time to finish the dungeon. So I started asking myself, you know, why do people have to finish a dungeon in just 1 week? Why can't we let people finish the dungeon over 2 weeks instead? And so I ended up talking to design about that, and they thought it was a good idea, and eventually I got that into the game.
Well, one of the things that does sometimes get in the way is that balance, and every now and then the player in me sometimes speaks a little too loudly. We'll say it that way. So sometimes we see some changes coming for like classes, and I go, wait, you can't do that. That would completely break the class. And of course it's not going to completely break the class, but fear change, you know, we really like, we get so, we invest ourselves so heavily in our characters in the game that, you know, we really resist changes, and every now and then I fall subject to that, you know, passionate.
Every time I add a feature, I personally go on the forums and read almost everything I possibly can about the feature I just added. Even if I didn't design the feature, I would go up there and read.
You have to don the flame retardant suit every now and then. There's always useful discussion. Even when there's lots of trollers and lots of flames, somebody somewhere has usually got something worth saying.
So a while back, I was leveling up an alt with my family. There were 4 of us. When we went to do a dungeon, we'd need a 5th person. We ended up trying to use LFG, but we'd almost never find anybody. So when design wanted to overhaul the LFG system, I asked if I could work on that. They wanted to increase the number of players in the matchmaking pool by having everybody on an entire battle group be able to play together. I spent the next couple of weeks revising my algorithm, and I finally got something that was reasonably close. It's really nice to be able to iterate on things like that even after the patch has gone live.
World of Warcraft is such a big game. There's so much in it that I can actually put on the player hat and still play the game. I'm not as, I mean, yeah, of course, when things go wrong, yeah, what's X going on here? I see some bad visual, yeah, I make a note of it, I send myself an email. Of course I do. It's inevitable. But it's still, I can just keep the player hat on and have a lot of fun with it. And it's amazing.
Here at Blizzard, we're very excited about the upcoming release of Cataclysm and what it means for the Warcraft universe. Over the past several years, players have experienced some of the biggest moments in the history of Warcraft, from fighting the Burning Legion in Outland to battling the Lich King in Northrend. Now they'll be asked to save the world of Azeroth itself from complete destruction. So if you're up for the challenge, a new and fully transformed World of Warcraft awaits you, and I'll see you online.